Tommy, the thinking that around my response as no, it to me is not really a yes/no question in the first place. My answer is no is based more on should the ideology of the 30% or 20% or 50% be rethought, and I definitely believe that is an emphatic no. I believe that broad-based participation in projects is imperative for growth in the country. What I do believe, though, is that there's possibly been a knee-jerk reaction by SOEs and our companies and major employers, organizations which have climbed onto a political roadshow and have not necessarily given the amount of thought and clear direction for the implementation of these targets. I think these targets are achievable, but it can't be placed purely at the door of the contractor, but rather at the door of the owner of the contract, the asset. Let's say, for example, and I use it loosely, the South African National Roads Agency. I mean, they've got assets all over the country, and unfortunately, they do have a slight reputation of unrest, derailing their projects due to expectations which are within the communities that they are engaging, which are sometimes, I think, a little bit over exuberant. I think this is more the challenge of the social fabric of the country that we're in at the moment. We've got desperate people looking for a hand up. We're not even going to go down the COVID at the moment, because I mean this was way before COVID pandemic hit. That's only just going to exacerbate it. But when political utterances around targets are made, the people who listen to these utterances take it through or understand it or interpret it through the filter of where their current bias is. So I'm pricing a project to build a couple of bridges and a road through a town which is at the moment battling financially. There's mismanagement in the municipality. The district is impoverished. Now there's 200-300 million rand going to be spent on a project which is going to dissect this area, and everybody's excited because they believe that they're going to become rich out of this project. So I think just to get back to the question itself, is it a yes/no answer? No, it's not a yes/no answer. But the context of my no is the targets are important for the participation and the growth of the social fabric of society at large. But how we implement it remains the big question going forward. Yes, and I know these are totally different subjects, and what I'm going to say would require a lot of input from stakeholders across the board and interested parties. So I'm not going to wave a magic wand and say this is the right solution. But if we go back to the sort of early 2000s, late 1990s, the construction industry had a challenge in as much as the compliance with health and safety regulations. There were major accidents on construction sites. There was a loose compliance amongst contractors, and this led to, as I said, major accidents happening, and generally a a roughshod approach to ensuring the safety of workers and other participants of projects around South Africa. There was a concerted effort from the Labour Department, various stakeholders being, I think, SAFSEC, from the civil engineering side, maybe MBA, and there was new draft legislation put forward, which eventually saw the promulgation of the construction regulations, which were enshrined within the Occupational Health and Safety Act, which placed specific requirements and specific undertakings and accountability takes for various levels within a construction project. What it did do as well is it defined the role players quite clearly. The project owner being the client, the end user, he took overall, or takes overall responsibility for the implementation of health and safety. The onus is on him is to ensure that his health and safety requirements at a minimum comply with the Occupational Health and Safety Act or the Mines Act, depending on which industry you're working in. And then that information needs to be disseminated into his various role players, contractors, subcontractors, and other stakeholders in a project. The responsibility is never diluted. It always remains at the door of the client. The accountability and reporting always goes upwards to the project owner. What it also does is it stipulates that the contractor is an employer in his own right. Because of that, he takes on his own responsibility as an employer, and it's not diluted by the fact that he's in contract with the client. I'm waffling on a little bit about this, but what it does do, and let's not get into the nitty-gritties of that, but what it does do is it ring fences responsibility, it ring fences who is responsible for what and how they are responsible. It's legislated. It carries punitive penalties, be it in the form of fines, jail term, all sorts of things for various categories of accidents in that. It also stipulates the policies and procedures that need to be followed in order for your company to be compliant, the audit schedules, the various meetings, the various responsibilities and reporting structures that need to be in place, and yes, it formalizes that whole requirement. Now, the reason I'm speaking around this is I do see some similarities in this, although one is a very practical outpouring in as much as health and safety, and the other is a more social impact. But my thinking is, if a singular structure or manner of thinking is put forward, where all major employers, be they state-owned entities, but all parties which are subscribed to the requirement of the 30%, for example, requirement of localization, would need to follow a similar roadmap, and in that have a legislated takeoff of whose responsibility it is at each phase. Right now, and I'm going to say this reservedly, because I do know that some of the SOEs are putting a lot of effort, or I'm sure they are all putting a lot of effort into this. But once again, to me, it's a little bit of a shrapnel approach, instead of having a very singular-minded way of approaching. The any party where the onus is laid at their door is at risk if they don't understand the very fundamental ground rules of how something is going to be implemented, or accountability is going to be sought, or targets are going to be met. And once again, I'll go back. The framework is blurry at best. The expectations of the stakeholders are sitting up here. The clients, in my view, are often, it's written in the contract what you need to do, go do it. Contractors are fundamentally good at building bridges and building roads and building structures and rail networks, etc. They're not social social conscious establishment which go in and mentor and grow and establish businesses outside of their own businesses. Traditionally, a subcontractor is brought on to provide a service which is either outside of the expertise of the main contractor, or is a service that the main contractor deems as he can have it done more productively by an external participant. By enforcing these targets of 30% makes life extremely difficult. If it was just a straight 30% requirement, and the availability of strong, sustainable and developed contractors, there was a pool of these guys available within that local authority, municipality, district, municipality, whatever the stipulation is, and that's fine. The engagement with them can be on a level which is with any other subcontractor. However, it's not as simple as that, because the areas that these projects are rolled out into are often quite rural. The skills are very minimal. The business acumen of the contractors, they might have registered on a database, or they might not have. The business acumen is left wanting, so that there's often a misinterpretation by these business owners that if they get 30% of a 1 billion rand contract, they're going to get 300 million rand in their bank account up front. The noble cause of establishing, growing, mentoring, and assisting smaller contractors to grow is lost very early on through just an unclear mandate. We, when I was with my previous company, we built a dam up in the rural area of KwaZulu-Natal, and the participation was 25%, I think, at the time. There was very much a lot of confusion around the intersection of various ward councils, boundaries, district municipality boundaries, and as well as traditional boundaries. And all of these converged in an area which made life absolutely unbearable, because you had no authorities that you were dealing with. Everybody who walked across the threshold of your door was an authority, and they were demanding participation. The contract was very vague, other than it's the contractor's responsibility. What we proposed to our client at that stage was that we take a step back. We create a bit of a forum where we would bring all the leadership stakeholders in, and create at first a conversation, a narrative around what is available, what work is available, how we could involve them and get participation from them. They were quite keen on that. and we engaged in a couple of forums. Unfortunately, the first one that I was involved in, the moment we started speaking about it, it was treated with a lot of mistrust. So the local mayor, she was at the time, she stood up and basically told us that we were rich contractors and we were trying to exploit them, and we were now trying to back out of our responsibility to assist and all of that type of. And the sad thing was that was 100% opposed to what our actual commitment was. We were actually trying to find a way where we could include as many participants in the framework, and then find a way within our contract to forge a deal that would work for all the parties involved. What we proposed at the time was to set up an incubation program where we would bring skills from our side, which would be quantity surveyors, young engineers, older sort of mentoring type engineers, and they would form a mentoring incubation sort of framework, and they would assist these smaller contractors with, first of all, when early engagement, we'll have 10 contractors who would make them tender for the work. We wouldn't just give it to them. So they would tender, we'd help them with their tenders, we'd give them all of that, that backup and support, understanding contract documentation, understanding what their responsibility would be, understanding what the end goal would be, and then through that, helping them build up their rates and then submit to the main contractor as a competitive bid. Where the impasse came is we said to them, look, we're prepared to bring these guys to the party, but they are costs to the company. We haven't allowed this type of cost in, okay? But what we're trying to achieve there is, so there is the end, if we're going to be serious about achieving the end goal of having meaningful participation and actually leaving a legacy after the project, that something has been left behind, and that these guys are now really empowered. They haven't just got a bit of, if we could leave us a really sustainable bunch of people or small businesses which could now offer fencing and paving and laying of premix, and we built a small school for them at the time, and if that to us would have been the major success of that project. Unfortunately, it fell down to a contractual issue where the client said, no, we're not interested, we're not going to pay you a cent more for this. We weren't asking for an extra. It was a totally audited, open, in fact, they would sit on the panel of who we use, and they would participate in it as well. And unfortunately, because the contract didn't allow for it, it all fell through the wayside, and the project plodded on, and there were various unrest because they saw this now as a promise, and now they saw the contractors reneging on the promise, and they stoned vehicles and they burnt offices and At the end of the day, the project was finished. The dam is a beautiful dam. It's one of the really successful project from an engineering perspective. From a social perspective, the plight of the people who were involved in the project, yes, they got some employment, temporary employment, because they worked on the dam. But as far as upskilling and assisting with sustainable business growth, our thinking at the time was we would like to cherry pick from these contractors who, the guys, you're always going to get the performers who stand out, and then bring those onto our enterprise development team to help them on a greater scale outside of the specifics of the contract and into the more participative construction industry. And unfortunately, that initiative, and I won't put my hand up and take credit for it, because it didn't even come from me. I was part of it, but certainly wasn't the instigator of it. But that initiative came to naught, and that, I believe, could have been a fantastic driver. So when policies and gazettes are signed and put in, they aren't worth the paper they're written on unless there's a very strong will for these things to actually come to pass. And that's where my excitement comes in, because on the one hand, I look at South Africa as a country. I was born here too many years ago for me to discuss right now. I've participated in the fabric of the construction industry for 32 years. And I think we've said it before, Tommy, and you probably pick it up in some of your comments on the Hardhat Professional. Construction is one of those things that's in your blood. You can't take somebody out of a suit and say, you've got management skills, go run a project. It's either in you or it's not. It's one of those things, and it's like being a nurse or a doctor. It's a calling. So I get excited when I see young entrepreneurs who have got excitement. That they're able to get work. They see a big government project coming into their area. They want to be there. There is another factor which is quite sad, and I think it's brought about through the poverty of the nation as we are at the moment. But vigilantism and opportunistic criminality also climbs onto this 30% thing, and all of a sudden you've got a forum which decides that they are going to demand that they get 30%. So you get groupings who have got no interest in construction, no interest in developing a company. They're disruptors, but they will demand that 30%, and as far as they possibly can, they'll keep it for themselves and share it amongst their cronies. The contractor at the end of the day ends up with the risk, because he's had to spend 30% of his revenue on subcontractors or forum which cannot produce the quality and that's required. They work unsafely. So there's just so many parameters that need to be looked at, contributing factors which need to be considered when putting this together.